Topuria vs Holloway is the greatest matchup this year. Topuria is coming off of the biggest win of his career with his KO win over Volk, and Holloway is coming off of one of the most impressive performances of his career with his KO win over Gaethje. With us knowing that this fight would eventually happen, I can't imagine a better time to have this matchup. I've seen a lot of different opinions about this fight, and I wanted to weigh in because I do think a lot of people are basing their pick on emotion rather than logic, and I want to try to give a non-biased analysis of this fight. From my early impressions about this matchup, I do see it going Topuria's way. I know people will look at how he beat Volk and say he can't emulate that against Holloway because of his chin, but in this video I'll explain why that may not necessarily be the case, and why I think he doesn't need to emulate his performance against Volk to win this fight. Yes, we all know Holloway has a great chin. He's never been knocked out, but boy oh boy, he has gotten cracked hard. And in his last fight, we seen him get dropped for the first time in his career. Now I know officially it didn't count as a knockdown, but even Holloway admitted after the fight that it should have. You look at it historically, once you start getting cracked, the way your body reacts starts to change over time. For example, let's look at Cheeto. We've seen him absorb some very hard strikes throughout his UFC career, but without a doubt the hardest strike we've seen him get hit with was that knee in the O'Malley fight. His neck snapped all the way back, and yet he was able to make it to a decision without hitting the canvas, which against O'Malley is a true testament to his chin. But then in his very next fight against Figgy, he gets hit with a hard punch, no doubt about it, but one with not nearly the steam behind of it as O'Malley's knee, and yet this time Vera hits the canvas. Now that could just be a testament to the power of Figgy at 135, but let me remind you, Figgy's two other fights at this weight were against Rob Font and Cody Garbrandt, who are guys, if we're being honest, don't necessarily have the best chins in the world when it comes to getting knocked down at least, and Figgy never knocked them down. So in my opinion, the reason we've seen Vera react that way to a seemingly weaker strike was due to the residual effects of absorbing that knee from O'Malley. Maybe I'm wrong, but let's look at another example. Volkanovski gets obliterated at 155 against Islam by a perfectly set up kick, and then gets hit with multiple vicious and probably unnecessary follow-up strikes, and yet he doesn't go completely out. He's definitely seeing stars, but he was still conscious. Now you fast forward to his fight with Topuria, and things don't play out that way. In a lower weight class against a less physically imposing fighter, he gets hit with a solid hook from Topuria and is put all the way out. Again, take from that what you will, but what I'm taking from both the Cheeto and Volk examples is that Holloway's legendary chin might be in trouble. Holloway has absorbed the most strikes in UFC history, is coming off of getting supposedly knocked down for the first time in his career. Going up against the power of Topuria, it's looking rough for Holloway. Now yes, maybe Topuria doesn't punch as hard as Gaethje, but like in the Volk and Cheeto examples, that may not matter. And guess what, you know who hits harder than both Gaethje and Topuria? That motherfucking weight cut. Holloway has historically had some really rough weight cuts in his UFC career. You look at his weight cut for his third fight with Volk, he looked very drained. That fight at that point in his career was probably the most important. You know he would have trained his ass off for that fight, he had plenty of time to prepare, and yet he seemingly had a terrible weight cut, and his performance in that fight would support that claim. Now we have to remember that was before Holloway gained all of that weight for the Gaethje fight. Holloway mentioned in his preparation for UFC 300, he wanted to approach moving up in weight properly and spent most of his camp adding size. He never had a lot of muscle before, and we've seen how difficult cutting weight was for him. So now that he's added muscle, imagine how his weight cut's gonna look. These are things I just can't ignore, but at the end of the day, I know most of you guys will. So fuck it. Fuck it. Let's say his chin is better than ever and he has the best weight cut of his career, which honestly I wouldn't even put past Holloway. Even then, this is one of the worst stylistic matchups for Holloway. Yes, Gaethje is a veteran, a beast, an amazing striker, but he does not have the technique that Topuria has. And deep down you know that too. Same thing with Allen, he's great, but he doesn't compare to Topuria. Do I even have to mention Zombie? The only guys whose striking you can compare to Topuria's that Holloway has fought in recent history is Volk, and I'll give Kattar some respect too. Volk, we've seen how those fights went, but Kattar, Max fucked him up. That was another one of Holloway's best performances, but there's a few things that make me write that one off as far as this fight with Topuria goes. For one, Kattar's the same height as Holloway. All of Holloway's losses in his career have come against fighters that are 5'9" and under. I'm not sure why he struggles more against shorter fighters, but he does, and Topuria being 5'7" matches the criteria of a fighter Max would struggle with. The second point I'll make about that fight is that Kattar's not nearly the grappling threat that Topuria is. Yes, Kattar will grapple, but he's not as effective effective at it. I think the fear of being taken down was another reason Volk had the amount of success he had in the trilogy with Holloway. I know people will point to the Edgar fight because he's a grappler and Max beat him, but he's not the striker that Topuria is, and obviously I'll say the same thing about Ortega. As a 1-2 punch with their striking and grappling, literally the only fighter you can compare Topuria to at featherweight is Volk. So personally, I don't know how you could possibly be confident in Holloway winning this fight. I love Holloway just as much as the next guy. He's a Raptors fan. I'm from Toronto and love the Raptors as well, so we have that connection. He blew me away with his performance against Gaethje, so I understand if you're still on the high from that fight. But when you look at this fight for what it is and remove all biases, I struggle finding ways Holloway can win this fight. Regardless, I know people will be mad, but I'm here for the hate, so let me know how you guys are feeling.